Caleb Williams is coming into one of the best situations a rookie quarterback has ever had. But the Chicago Bears should still do more in the NFL draft to make his job even easier.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on X at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast on all of your favorite social media platforms at Locked On Bears. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, we look at what kind of supporting cast Caleb Williams will be coming into in Chicago and how that compares to the type of surrounding players that other rookie quarterbacks have had, mainly in recent history, but really throughout NFL history, and kind of compare, is he truly coming into maybe the best situation that any rookie quarterback has had? And we're talking specifically like rookie quarterbacks who have had to start and play in year one, right? I mean, you could argue that guys like Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love that came in and got to sit on the bench, that's a better situation. It's better for them if they get to sit, you might argue. And maybe some of these late round picks that have been drafted by great teams, were drafted to better teams, but those quarterbacks that didn't play, they don't count in this situation. We're looking at specifically like what guys who had to get on the field early in their careers, what they were coming into, and why the Bears are putting Caleb Williams in a very, very good spot. And it can really be truly the best spot if they do just a little bit more in the upcoming NFL draft. I want to focus first on what Caleb Williams has and try and get a sense of how great this will be for a number one overall pick quarterback, or really any rookie quarterback coming into a new situation like this, to have in Chicago. And then we can do a proper job of comparing and contrasting that to what other quarterbacks have gotten. As we stand right now, Caleb Williams, once he's drafted by the Chicago Bears with the number one overall pick, will come into a roster with 2,000-yard receivers. Two guys that call them number one wide receivers. I mean, everyone's got a different definition for how you define number one wide receiver, but two guys who are certainly top 20 wide receivers in the NFL. That feels like a pretty safe ranking to put them both in. And you could argue potentially top 15. You could argue potentially top 10. I don't think they're both top 5 wide receivers in the NFL. Like, I'm not here to argue exactly how good Keenan Allen and DJ Moore are, and certainly as Keenan Allen continues to age, he may slowly move down that wide receiver ranking, but Keenan Allen is coming off of a 1,200-yard season with 108 catches and 7 touchdowns, and DJ Moore is coming off of a 1,300-yard season with 96 catches and 8 touchdowns. Like, these two guys, in terms of like receiving yards in the NFL this season, were 9th and 12th. So like literally by that measurement, it's two top 12 producing wide receivers in the NFL. Now, with both of them on the same roster, are they both going to finish in the top 12? No, but that's not the point, right? He's got two great wide receivers on this team. Not much else at wide receiver, and that's part of the conversation here when we're taking into stock, like, how good is Caleb Williams supporting cast? Two great receivers, one of the best wide receiver duos that any rookie quarterback has come into. We'll go through some of the comparisons here in a little bit. There have been other really, really good wide receiver duos that rookie quarterbacks have come into, including one that involved Keenan Allen not that long ago, but still, just the two of them is a great receiver pair. And if you added a third one in the NFL draft, maybe even with that 9th overall pick, if you put Rome Odunze in with Caleb Williams and Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, that's instantly, I think, the best trio of wide receivers that any quarterback has come into. And again, there's maybe a couple of teams that have an argument to make there, but not, I don't think you could, if it's the top 10 pick plus the two guys the Bears have, I think it's going to be pretty well set there. Then, of course, at tight end, you've got Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett, two guys who have been number one tight ends before. Maybe neither one is, a truly dominant game-changing player. Neither one's, a top 5 player at their position. Neither one is a 1,000-yard receiver at tight end. These are not Travis Kelce, George Kittle caliber players, but two very good tight ends. I think Gerald Everett's best suited as a very, very good number 2 and maybe a low-end number 1. And Cole Kmet's obviously been proving himself as a consistent receiver in an offense. Like, that's a really darn nice set of weapons to pass to for a quarterback. Plus, someone like DeAndre Swift out of the backfield, who's a consistent, can be a 1,000-yard guy and perhaps more. I mean, was last year for Philadelphia, but obviously made a big jump there. Khalil Herbert has been an explosive, productive running back throughout his young career. Roshan Johnson looks like a young, up-and-coming running back who's tough and physical and can hold up in pass protection and be an important part of your offense. Like, you've got really good running back depth with talent at the top and talent across the depth chart. You've got good tight end talent, and I guess you can call that depth when it's 2 players, but still good wide receiver talent at the top. And then the offensive line is a work in progress, but improving. And we're certainly curious to see how this sort of chicken and the egg scenario plays out with the offensive line when it came to Justin Fields. I think there's arguments you get from especially people outside of Chicago that say Fields made his offensive line look worse than it was. And other people say the offensive line made Fields look worse than it was. And it's sort of like, okay, well, is Fields the problem and the offensive line is good? Is Fields good and the offensive line is bad? Are they both bad? Certainly we're not, I guess the only outcome is that they're not both good. If they're both good, we would have seen them both be good. But we're still trying to wait and see what that looks like. But presumably, Darnell Wright will continue to develop at right tackle. Braxton Jones will, at the very least, stay the same, if not continue to develop at left tackle or potentially be replaced in the NFL draft with a better left tackle. You love Tevin Jenkins at left guard whenever he's healthy, one of the better young left guards in the NFL. We don't love the kind of production we got from Nate Davis this past season, but I think we've seen him play better than that before in Tennessee, and there was certainly some off-the-field stuff he was dealing with away from the team that perhaps was influencing his level of play this season. I think Nate Davis is not a lost cause, although I'm not holding out hope that he's going to turn into some Pro Bowl player, but I think there's a feeling like he can get back to being perhaps more reliable this year than he was the year before. And then the center position is a competition. Ryan Bates, Coleman Shelton, I don't love either one of them, but hopefully between the two of them, one of them will win that competition and emerge. Well, one of them, of course, will win the competition, but one of them will emerge as a better player and the one that is consistent. And hopefully, we don't get to week 6 and the Bears say, all right, we're making the change at center because the guy who won the competition didn't turn out to be as good as we thought he would be. And then we go back and forth and do the same offensive line rotations that have become so frustrating in recent years in Chicago. But across the board, you look at Caleb Williams' supporting cast, you feel like decent offensive line. Not great, not terrible, somewhere between below average to above average is where we expect them to wind up. Probably closer to average. Could be above average, depending on if the Bears can add more there. And if young players keep getting better, then they can be an above average offensive line. If there's injuries and still questions about the center position, maybe they'll be below average, but they're not going to be terrible. It should be an okay to fine to good offensive line. You've got 2 great receivers and 2 very good tight ends and a very good backfield. That is more than the Bears have certainly given a rookie quarterback in a long time, and it's more than most number 1 overall picks come into in the rookie season. Maybe by year 2 or year 3, teams are finally in a better position to build around them with more resources, but the Bears are ahead of the pack on that because they weren't the worst team in football this season. I guess that by record, they were the 9th worst team in football if they got the 9th overall pick, but the team that finishes 9th doesn't usually get the number 1 overall pick, and that's how Caleb Williams comes into a better situation than most rookie quarterbacks. There's a couple of rookies in the last decade or so that can make a pretty strong argument of who had the better supporting cast, them or Caleb Williams. And if the Bears add more in the draft, I think that could kind of tip the scales there. But we'll look at who comes close and who's pretty debatable here with what the Bears have for Caleb compared to what other teams did for other recent rookie quarterbacks next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy to help you be your best self and make time for the things that are most important to you. Online therapy is a really important part of my personal mental health regimen, and I can't recommend doing so with our friends at BetterHelp enough. It's a phenomenal service, and it's so important to me. Just like I like to take care of my body by going to the gym, I like to take care of my brain by going to therapy. It's not about my brain being broken or being in crisis mode or needing to be totally fixed, but it's about making it stronger. Just like going to the gym is not trying to fix my body necessarily. It's just trying to make it stronger and as healthy as it possibly can be. And that's what therapy can do for your mental health. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a questionnaire, they match you with a therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Caleb Williams might have the best help any rookie quarterback has ever had, and certainly my knowledge only goes through my lifetime when it comes to really knowing the rosters of rookie quarterbacks. I tried to go back through some of the the 80s and 90s, or I was alive in the 90s, but the 80s and 70s drafts of I was looking at Terry Bradshaw's rookie season and some of those, even Joe Namath back in the AFL, and I didn't go much deeper than that, so maybe there was a rookie quarterback in the 40s that came into some great situation, but I can't promise that I know all-time every football roster through and through, but it seems like a lot of the more modern rookie quarterbacks have been the ones that have come into better situations. You've seen, this past season, CJ Stroud has a great rookie season. I don't know if we'd argue that, when they drafted CJ Stroud, I don't think anyone was saying, wow, CJ Stroud is coming into the best supporting cast of any rookie quarterback, but it felt like those guys grew with him. He helped elevate their level of play. I mean, he's got good players, right? No one's saying he came into a bad supporting cast. Devin Singletary, Damon Pierce, and then a receiver, the Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz at tight end. They also had Noah Brown and Robert Woods at receiver. It was a pretty good supporting cast for CJ Stroud. He definitely had a good supporting cast. Not no one thought that was going to be as great as it turned out to be, but it was a pretty good group. And I'd argue the year before that, Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh came into a decent supporting cast in terms of the weapons they were able to surround him with. Najee Harris in the backfield was the leading rusher for them and has been a 1,000-yard type guy. And then at receiver, you had Deontay Johnson and George Pickens on the outside. And then Pat Freiermuth has kind of quietly, if you're not a fantasy football player, maybe you don't see as much of Pat Freiermuth being as productive as he's been in his career. But he's been a darn good tight end for them. He had weapons in Pittsburgh. They started his rookie season with Chase Claypool as well, who turned out to not be great, but I think going into that year, it was wow, they had three great receivers, three very good receivers in Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, and Chase Claypool, plus Pat Freiermuth at tight end. So we've seen the last couple of seasons, rookie quarterbacks come in, and I don't think Pickett was great at all, but he came into a good situation and didn't thrive, and CJ Stroud came into a decent situation and did thrive. So it's the idea that the supporting cast is very important, but it's also not the only thing, right? A great supporting cast cannot make a great quarterback out of a bad one. And I don't mean to crap on Kenny Pickett too much, but another great example from recent season, Trey Lance, drafted number 3 overall by the 49ers. Similar situation to the Bears, right? Not trading up, but a team that's much better than where they picked that quarterback comes into a San Francisco team that was Super Bowl caliber, right? That had to be one of the best rookie supporting casts we've ever seen, right? Elijah Mitchell at the running back position wasn't a big name, but they had a great rushing attack with behind that offensive line. And then at receiver, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, maybe not what they Ayuk has continued to get even better, but Samuel was absolutely phenomenal that season. And of course, George Kittle at tight end, and they had pretty good defense in San Francisco. Trey Lance is instantly the one that you start to stack up with Caleb Williams here is who came into a better situation? Lance going to the 49ers in 21 or Caleb coming to the Bears in 2024? If you really kind of put them all head to head here, you can move down to Joe Burrow in 2020. In the backfield, they had Joe Mixon, and I think Mixon ended up getting hurt that season, but certainly came into, having Mixon and then Gio Bernard in that backfield was really solid. At receiver, they had an older A.J. Green, so he wasn't prime A.J. Green, but he was still all right. And T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd were still really good there. Obviously hadn't had Jamar Chase yet because he was still in college, but coming along there. C.J. Uzoma at tight end, not a George Kittle type player, but a fine, productive tight end. Like we've seen back-to-back years here, right? 2020 and then 21, 22, 23, and now Williams in 24. At least one quarterback every year has come into a pretty good spot. Burrow, and then Trey Lance, and then Kenny Pickett, and then CJ Stroud, and now Caleb Williams. Before them, you got to go back a lot farther. And I think another one of these guys that's right in that conversation with Caleb Williams here is Andrew Luck, another number 1 overall pick back in 2012. He had Vic Ballard and Donald Brown in that backfield. They ended up being a pretty good running back duo, not like an elite running back duo, but they were a successful rushing attack. And then at receiver, Reggie Wayne and T.Y. Hilton were really there, sort of like two-headed weapon there. Donnie Avery actually had a pretty productive season for them as a number 3. I don't think of him as an elite receiver by any means, but he had like 700 yards that year. Like they had a really good offense because, in large part, because Andrew Luck was really good too. And there's kind of another one of those like chicken and the egg conversations here, right? It's like, okay, was the supporting cast great or was the quarterback great? Did the supporting cast make the quarterback look good or did the quarterback make the supporting cast look better than it was? Like I think CJ Stroud makes the Texans supporting cast look better than it was. But like a really good supporting cast in San Francisco wasn't really able to make Trey Lance look better than he was. And that never really came out. So like did Andrew Luck, I don't think Andrew Luck specifically elevated the play of T.Y. Hilton or Reggie Wayne because those guys were great before Andrew Luck got there. But like their tight ends that season, Dwayne Allen and Colby Fleener, they were both like rookies that year, but had productive seasons. I thought they were going to be a great tight end duo that never really panned out in large part because Andrew Luck ended up leaving too. But you know, like I thought that was a nice supporting cast for him. And then a little bit farther back than him, Joe Flacco, 2008, Baltimore Ravens. That backfield was LaRon McClain and Willis McGahee. They were really hard to bring down. That was a great running back duo. At receiver, they had Derek Mason and Mark Clayton, who were both, I think, 1,000-yard guys or pretty close to 1,000-yard guys. And then Todd Heap at tight end was also like Mr. Reliable safety blanket for Joe Flacco. Like both Luck and Flacco, I believe, in their respective rookie seasons, had double-digit wins. I don't know if they made the playoffs, both of them, or if they went on much of a playoff run, but like they were able to have pretty successful rookie seasons in large part not only because they were good, really good quarterbacks, but also because they had really good supporting casts. They came into good situations, which like, again, Luck is kind of similar to Caleb Williams in the sense that like the Colts only had the number 1 pick because Peyton Manning was hurt. It wasn't like their team was terrible. It was that their team was built around a Hall of Fame quarterback. And then without the Hall of Fame quarterback, the team was terrible, but only because of the quarterback situation. So that allowed them to land Luck and still have a pretty good supporting cast around the QB because they didn't have to do years of continual losing to be bad enough to get that pick. They just happened to have to lose the Hall of Fame quarterback for a season and then ultimately, move on and send him off to the Denver Broncos. The Ravens, not quite the same situation there, but they were always kind of a tough running team and had such a great defense for so long that when they added Joe Flacco, not at the top of the draft, like he could come in and have a pretty well-inherited football team. So like, I think to me, out of all these guys we've talked about, each one, you start to put them head-to-head to the Bears. It's like, okay, like some teams had a better number 3 receiver. Like Burrow had the better number 3 than what Caleb Williams has right now. But if Caleb Williams gets Rome Odunze during the draft, then he'll have the better number 3 receiver there. Or like Trey Lance definitely had the better tight end. And the better tight end, overall was Kittle. And I don't think anybody else is like head and shoulders above Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett, but you could make a head-to-head argument about Pat Freiermuth, I guess. But like, I don't know if the backfield in San Francisco was as elite, but the offensive line was elite. And none of this is even talking about the defenses, by the way. Like that's part of this conversation as well. But I do think we're very quick to assume the Bears defense is going to be great next season. And I think they're going to be very good, but like we think they're going to like, it's easy to just assume, they were so great last year, they're going to be exactly as good this year. But like, let's not forget, you swap out Eddie Jackson for Kevin Byard. And now you don't have a running mate for Montez Sweat just yet. You haven't added the depth on the defensive line yet. I'm not saying the Bears defense is going to be bad, but we're really quick to say, they're going to be another top 5 defense. Like, well, maybe they will be, but let's wait and see. And I think Joe Flacco had a really great defense in 2008. I think the Colts defense with Luck was decent. And obviously the 49ers defense with Lance was pretty darn good too. So like all those guys I think are really neck and neck. And I think what the Bears do in this draft can go a long way towards separating who really has the best supporting cast here. Like if the Bears get out of this draft with a good number 3 receiver and a really good edge rusher and maybe another offensive lineman, like that could be enough to say, nope, Caleb Williams is for sure the top best supporting cast. If not, like I think he might be one of the best number 1 overall pick supporting casts. The other name I'd throw in there was Carson Palmer in 2004. He had Rudy Johnson in the backfield, had 1,400 yards rushing. And then he had Chad Johnson and TJ Hushmanzada were both basically 1,000-yard receivers. Hushmanzada was just short, but they were close enough. They both 1,000 yards from scrimmage receivers. And Rudy Johnson was a 1,500-yard rusher, total yards from scrimmage there. Like, those are three absolutely dynamic weapons for him. Their defense wasn't as good, but as far as number one overall picks go, it's Caleb, it's Andrew Luck, and it's Carson Palmer. Like, those are the three best supporting casts any number one overall pick has had. And I think Caleb's right in there among all the other first round and week one starting quarterbacks or just rookie year starting quarterbacks across the league. The other issue here, though, is when we talk about supporting cast, we're talking about receivers, running backs, O-line, and defense. But maybe even the bigger factor, or just as important of a factor in a rookie quarterback success, is not just the players around them, but the coaches. And we'll look at what Caleb Williams is getting with Shane Waldron compared to what some of those other rookie quarterbacks had in their first seasons next on Locked On Bears. Where is it? This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I use Game Time all the time, and I cannot recommend it strong enough. I actually just used it this past weekend. I saw Arsenio Hall open for Jay Leno doing stand-up comedy. One of those kind of shows that, like, I feel like it's not a once-in-a-lifetime thing, but, like, you never know how many more years those guys are still going to be performing out doing it live. And to be able to see two absolute comedy legends was incredible. And I got to see him through Game Time. I could see my view from my seat at the venue, so I knew exactly where I was sitting and what I was going to be able to see during the show. And with Game Time's all-in pricing, there were no surprise fees at the end that made my tickets more expensive than I thought they were going to be. It's really a great way to not only get tickets for events you want to go to, but also discover new events that you didn't even realize were coming in your area. And they've got last-minute deals where you can save up to 60% off buying your last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy shows, theater, you name it. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So more than just the wide receivers, the tight ends, the running backs, the defense around Caleb Williams and around other rookie quarterbacks, a big part of the factor here of the rookie quarterbacks who have been successful quickly is the coaching they received. And in particular, the offensive coaching, the play caller that they were working with also seems to be a really strong correlation. Not a perfect correlation, but a pretty strong correlation between the quarterbacks we've seen that have been very successful early in their careers. Talk about CJ Stroud this past season, having Bobby Slowick as an offensive coordinator, clearly one of the smart up-and-coming OCs. We'll see if that means he becomes a good head coach or not, but clearly was able to do things with that Texans offense that were impressive. Not perfect, but like really innovative, fun, clever, creative, and putting that quarterback in a great position to be successful. And also putting some of those lesser heralded or younger skill players in good positions to succeed. Tank Dell as a rookie has a big season. Nico Collins continues to get better. Dalton Schultz utilized a lot in that offense. And then Singletary and Pierce in the backfield. Like, those guys were put in good positions to put CJ Stroud in good positions to help them be the better quarterback, as opposed to Bryce Young, who goes to Carolina, where they traded away his top receiver and fired his offensive coordinator during the season, then fired his head coach during the season, who was also an offensive coach. Like, all of that matters a lot in terms of how we evaluate these quarterbacks. Like, you go through all the QBs we've talked about up to this point, right? For Caleb, it's Shane Waldron, and we're optimistic that given what Waldron was able to do with Geno Smith and temporarily Drew Lock and a little bit of Russell Wilson in Seattle, that he can come with Caleb Williams being a super talented quarterback, and he's got good weapons to work with in Chicago, much like having two really good receivers in Seattle and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Now he's got DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. He had multiple tight ends in Seattle that were good. He's got multiple tight ends in Chicago that are good. He's got a deep backfield in Chicago. He also had a iffy or shaky or decent TBD offensive line in Seattle, and the Bears are somewhere on that spectrum, but could be better than what he had in Seattle. But you know what I mean? Like, he's dealt with this kind of situation before. So we can be optimistic, maybe cautiously optimistic, but optimistic that Shane Waldron can be a good offensive coach to support Caleb Williams just as much as the actual players that Caleb Williams is going to work with. But some of the other rookie quarterbacks after CJ Stroud, like the ones we've talked about already, Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh, didn't have a great rookie season despite having a decent enough on paper playing supporting cast. But I don't think anyone thinks of the now former Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator Matt Canada as being, a great offensive coordinator. There were a lot of fire Matt Canada chants, and Matt Canada currently, I believe, is still unemployed after having been fired by the team during the season. Didn't get another job right away just yet. Like, that plays a big factor in here. Yet at the same time, Trey Lance had Kyle Shanahan and also really good players around him. Again, like, really good coach and really good players still can't make up for if the quarterback just isn't that good. But it goes a long way towards really kind of supporting these guys. Joe Burrow had Brian Callahan. I keep Bill and Brian, I get mixed up, but Brian Callahan, who is now the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. So, and I don't know if Brian Callahan's an elite offensive coordinator, but like, is certainly well regarded in the NFL, and that helps along with the good players that he had. Andrew Luck had Bruce Arians as his offensive coordinator / interim head coach at some point with Chuck Pagano's whole situation. Like, Arians, obviously a bright offensive mind who was super successful across the board in the NFL. Like, that makes a big difference for Luck to come in addition to having Reggie Wayne and T.Y. Hilton and all those guys in his supporting cast. Joe Flacco's a little bit of the exception. I mean, it depends on how you feel about Cam Cameron, but that was his offensive coordinator his rookie season. Like, I don't think Cam Cameron was terrible, but I think over time, Cam Cameron has fallen out of favor as, someone. I don't think he's viewed as, some elite offensive coordinator that was lifting up Joe Flacco there. Like, he really struggled in that 1 year as the Dolphins head coach. He's been out of the NFL since he left the Ravens in 2012. Like, I'm not here to, again, crap on Cam Cameron, but I don't think he's a elite offensive coordinator in there either. But was he holding Joe Flacco back? I don't think so. So, I mean, that's where it's, at least not his rookie season, at least in 2008. Like, that one's kind of iffy in there. I look at one guy we haven't talked about in this conversation is Justin Herbert as well. In 2020, he had Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry, and then his offensive coordinator as a rookie was Shane Steichen, who went on to be the Eagles offensive coordinator and is now the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. So, like, these guys have had a lot of these successful rookie quarterbacks with great supporting casts have generally also had pretty good offensive coordinator play callers. And some of the struggling guys, even if they have a decent supporting cast, have had maybe lesser offensive coordinator play callers. And that's where I said it in January on this podcast. Like, to me, this offseason, it was more important that the offensive coordinator decision the Bears made this year is going to be more important than the quarterback decision they make this year. Like, whether they were going to do Justin Fields or Caleb Williams, they needed the offensive coordinator to be right. Like, if Caleb Williams comes into a bad offensive coordinator, it's going to be hard for him to be successful. And if Justin Fields had stuck around with a bad offensive coordinator, it was going to be hard for him to be successful. Not impossible, but getting the offensive coordinator hire right is going to be perhaps the most important factor for Caleb Williams individually. Like, supporting cast is 10 guys on offense and 11 guys on defense. So, like, those 21 players probably matter more than one coach. But any one of those players does not matter as much as that one offensive coordinator hire. And it's imperative that Shane Waldron is the right coach for Caleb Williams, the same way that Bobby Slowick was the right coach for CJ Stroud, the same way that, I guess, Brian Callahan was the right coach for Joe Burrow, or Bruce Arians was the right coach for Andrew Luck. Like, that's going to be a really important factor in here. And it brings me back to, like, previous rookie Bears quarterbacks that didn't really have either the supporting cast or the coaching staff, right? Like, Justin Fields came in. I mean, he had David Montgomery, and, that was Darnell Mooney had the big 1,000-yard year that year, but then kind of a declining Allen Robinson and not much else at receiver. They had Cole Kmet and then, like, a declining old Jimmy Graham, but, like, Nagy and Bill Lazor didn't set up Fields for success. Like, coaching was not great there. Supporting cast was probably below average or average at best. And even worse across the board was Mitch Trubisky in 2017, right? Like, Jordan Howard and Tariq Cohen in the backfield, sure, but wide receivers like Cam Meredith, Kendall Wright, Josh Bellamy, Kevin White, there were a few other embarrassingly bad names in that receiver core. And then a tight end, the big signing that offseason, you may remember, was Deion Sims. And then they had Zach Miller still, and Zach Miller was good, but like Trubisky had it rough with Dowell Loggins as an offensive coordinator too. So like clearly Caleb Williams will have the best offensive coaching staff, offensive coordinator that a Bears rookie quarterback has had, even if Shane Waldron is average. Like that should be the best any of them have had. And he'll clearly have the best supporting cast of players that any Bears rookie quarterback has had. And he's right up there with Flacco, Luck, Trey Lance for the best receivers, running backs, offensive line, and defense that any rookie quarterback has had coming in, or Carson Palmer in terms of number 1 overall picks too. So like, gotta love it, right? Like that's exactly what you want. Like the Bears are so much more ready for a rookie quarterback right now than they've maybe ever been. And that's where we can all get excited about what this season and the next 5 to 10 seasons are going to bring for Caleb Williams in Chicago. We'll have a lot of time to break down what he brings to the Bears and what we can expect from him this rookie season. I do want to do a podcast here coming up soon, trying to set realistic expectations because the hype can pretty quickly get out of control, but the bar is also really low in Chicago. So we'll explore what that might look like for Caleb Williams right here on Locked On Bears. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, and I hope that as you listen every single day, you walk away with another opportunity to bear down.